8 years. For 8 years, Final Fantasy XIV has risen from the ashes of its original release and grown to become one of the biggest MMOs on the market. And it hasn't gotten there just from the merits of the name. The development team have nurtured a passionately made video game that does the Final Fantasy name proud, providing consistent updates on a predictable time frame, and with each story update edging closer and closer to an end goal. A Realm Reborn sets up everything that follows, from the frosty heights of Ishgard in Heavensward, to liberating oppressors in Stormblood, and then exploring another parallel world in Shadowbringers. The driving force behind all these events though has ever been the clash of the forces of Light and Dark, the Scions and the Ascians, Hydaelyn and Zodiac. With Endwalker, that overarching narrative has come to an end, and my word, it is glorious. There will be no spoilers in this review, rest assured. I'll also be avoiding visual spoilers by having the footage be mainly landscapes and skyboxes. The story is the culmination of everything that the dev team has learned about their game over the years, and concludes the main saga of this world in a very satisfying way. The presentation is the best I've seen from this game so far. A significant amount of the cutscenes make use of custom animations now, for example, which were used more sparingly in the past. The framing of the major cutscenes are also masterful, making artful choices with camera angles to convey meaning within the narrative. An example is that the camera uses harsh angles upon a character's face to express the unease you're meant to feel from their presence and the words they're saying. The story feels incredibly dense. By the time I'd reached the end of the level 83 quests, roughly a third of the way through the story content, I felt like so much had happened already. Major developments had happened with huge implications for the overall narrative, and I wasn't even halfway done. Let's just say that I could see why they didn't consider the fact that we go to the moon a spoiler in and of itself to the overall narrative. Without a doubt, this is the best paced story of the expansion so far. It's still a little slow in places, but mostly in that JRPG sort of way. Nothing unusual for either the series or the genre. Lore is explored in a satisfying manner to ensure everything makes sense, leaving no stone unturned, with even further exploration of the zones and lore found in the countless side quests. All incredibly optional of course, and none of which felt like they were going on too long either. To add to this point about how well paced the story in Endwalker is, the dungeons illustrate this well. Each and every one is significant to the story in some way. Sure, this is also the case at points in the other expansions, but a lot of them can mostly just boil down to traversing from one area to the other, like Samal in Heavensward, or just entering the hideout of a nasty monster like Malika's Well or Katana Rebel in Shadowbringers. That's not a knock on the quality, mind you, nor suggesting there's no story merits to them at all, but those examples in particular don't have massive narrative impacts. Not the case here in Endwalker though. The end of dungeons feel like they were important to the narrative of the story, be it putting down a significant foe causing havoc in the local area like the 83 and 85 dungeons, learning something significant to the main conflict like in the 81 and 87 dungeons, or a build up to an even greater threat or revelation found in the 89 and 90 dungeons. No time is wasted here. The trials, the major boss fights, are also incredible audio-visual experiences with massive significance to the story, the final trial bringing everything to a close on a scale that does the series proud. The story and questing are obviously not without its faults however. One major aspect of the story can come across as a bit of an ass-pull even if it holds up under scrutiny. It's the kind of thing that makes sense when you apply what you learn about it to previous events, but it only coming up now that it's appropriate makes it obvious that it's going to become a major aspect of the story. It's not really an issue, but when the concept was first brought up during the quest I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be a major part of the ending, isn't it? Again, not a major issue, just suffers from obvious planting. During the slower parts of the story, it can feel like things are being stretched out just a touch too thin. There was a late game story quest, for example, that had me seeking out 8 NPCs within a large area, I think, which felt like padding in the moment. The payoff in terms of story was mostly worth it, but the quest could have been heavily pruned and not much would be lost. Over the course of the expansion, a new quest type has been added too. It involves following an NPC while staying out of sight, much like those tailing missions in the GTA games. The success is a little mixed for me. On one hand, it's nice to have a quest type that is legitimately different to break things up a bit, but on the other hand, its implementation can be a bit shaky. When you first start the quest, it might not be completely obvious what exactly you must hide behind when the character turns around, and the routes they go on can be quite long, which means that if you fail, you must backtrack a decent distance. Their presence is healthy for the game, but I think they need a little more tweaking in the future. I guess the last issue with the questing, which has been something that could turn people off the game way before this point, is that a lot of the quests just aren't too interesting when you boil down what you're doing. There's little forced combat in quests outside of dungeons and trials, and what combat there is very easy. This has been part of the game for forever, with the quests mostly used to drive the story and provide cutscenes more than anything else. I mostly point this out to say that in regard to that aspect of the game, Endwalker doesn't really change anything. The battle system is largely unchanged from Shadowbringers. A couple of jobs have had major reworks, Monk and Summoner, and 2 new jobs have been added, Reaper and Sage. Monk is still a fast-paced brawler with the job now focusing on dealing burst damage through its perfect balance skill, using abilities in a way that feels somewhat like Blitz in Final Fantasy VI. They've also gutted all but 2 of the positionals, which reduces how punishing it felt to play at times for sure. The nature of the changes mean that the most optimal opener is a little unintuitive, but I think this is the best Monk has felt to play in a long time. The instant transmission gap closer ability they have feels awesome to use. For the other majorly changed job we have Summoner, which is basically the 3rd new job this expansion with how drastic the changes are. The changes play into the fantasy of being an actual summoner now, with its previous identity of being the damage of a time mage being removed. Instead, summoners go through phases of using abilities associated with each major summon. So for Ifrit phase you summon him to cause big damage, and then use fire aspected moves yourself, invoking the power of Ifrit within yourself to make use of his iconic melee abilities. The same happens for both Garuda and Titan, each feel unique. This is achieved with very few buttons too, which makes Summoner very beginner friendly now, on top of them only needing to hardcast spells about 3 times a minute. It's very different to what it was before, but I quite like it regardless. Reaper and Sage I don't have a lot of experience in so far, but what I've seen and heard of them are very positive. Reaper is an absolute damage powerhouse, and from reports I've heard of friends, overall very satisfying to play. I've leveled Sage to 80 so far, 10 levels, and so far I think it's a great healer. It's a healer that's encouraged to do as much damage as possible due to the passive healing it provides the player they link to. It's a touch more complex than most of the other healers, but its kit is also extremely well packed with regens and off-global cooldown heals that feel powerful enough to be satisfying. I spent most of my time playing the tanks, which by and large haven't changed much since Shadowbringers. They've had various quality of life changes, such as giving charges to various damage buffs as opposed to timers, apart from Blood Weapon puzzlingly, and giving Paladin more self-sustain within Holy Spirit phases. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. Dark Knight could use a bit more love in terms of its survivability and reducing some of its clunkiness, but otherwise they're all in a pretty good place right now. I've leveled them all to max and I've been really pleased with them for the most part. My mains have stayed what I always stuck to though, Gunbreaker and Warrior. These both feel great to me still, and Warrior is extremely comfy to play now too. In dungeons, they're nigh invincible with their bloodwetting raw intuition buff. Literally too angry to die. Gunbreaker is still the tank that plays like a DPS while still having a surprisingly wide range of defensive cooldowns, along with the second best tank and vulnerability skill in the game. What's eaten up all my time aside from the story is the endgame. It's nothing new if you've played the game before. 3 max level dungeons, 2 extreme trials for some gear to get started with, and a 4 floor raid tier, both normal mode and savage, which is the current end goal. The way the loot system works is exactly like before, nothing new, but it's a system that works well and feels ultimately fair. The encounters themselves though are really good fun. The trials aren't too difficult and present a variety of unique mechanics to the player that, when they were new, were satisfying to figure out. They're also simple enough that they're still fun enough to farm after the initial clear. There's no need for complex strategies with them, and the DPS check for them both is very lenient. Normal mode raids are a little more challenging than story trials, but not a significant amount. Again, the actual encounter designs are quite good, especially when seeing them for the first time. I do think that the first and second fight are a little boring to farm after the first week, but they're also the first 2 fights of a brand new raid series, so that's not a massive surprise to me. The aesthetics are also great for this tier, with an overall air of a gothic castle, like a Castlevania feeling, which is even evident with the vampire appearance of the final boss. My only real gripe with this raid tier is that the music, while great, is a little more repetitive this time. In Shadowbringers we got at least 3 unique pieces of music per raid tier, but we only have 2 this time. It makes progressing through the Savage fights feel a little more dragged out, although I will praise the floor 1 to 3 music for at least being broad in its atmosphere. Savage has been fun so far. The group have made it to the final fight, and I'll say that the battles have been really engaging. Even the first 2 floors, which I found rather dull eventually in normal mode, I think are extremely well designed and make use of the arena in some interesting ways. Floor 2 especially makes use of a unique arena in a way I haven't really seen much in this game. Reclears each week have been a blast and not something I've dreaded. So yeah, double thumbs up for the encounter design so far for Endwalker. The music for Endwalker is, as per usual, rather fantastic. It left an impression on me almost straight away when I entered Old Charlian for the first time, and heard the truly excellent music played there at night. music never really lets up either, ranging from the funky theme of Rad's at Han to the more intense themes. Back again to something more somber. And then can shift to some of the more epic pieces of the game so far when required. There are several songs that make use of lyrics, and they're incredibly well written. The lyrics written to be appropriate to the story, and where they're used in the game is extremely impactful, so I won't play them here to avoid spoiling the moment. All in all, I think Endwalker achieved for me what I thought to be impossible, to be better than Shadowbringers. Endwalker plays off things that were set up years ago, some of which were set up in A Realm Reborn, and does so masterfully while also having more than enough room for further adventures. There's still so many things we haven't seen of the world yet, and I look forward to the upcoming patch content to see what future awaits us. Before I close out this video, I want to discuss one last aspect to the story which I felt was more appropriate to hold for the end. The story of Endwalker is one that feels appropriate for the way the world is at the minute. You can look at the state of our world, and I wouldn't blame you for thinking there's no future here. I know I'm guilty of it at times. What resonated with me with Endwalker was that it portrays the worst possible conflict for a world to face. A truly apocalyptic, bleak future awaits the planet in the end of days. It's easy to size up the future ahead and see no way forward, to see no way to continue other than to just accept it, to give up. The characters refuse this nihilistic outlook, and instead of wallowing in the dread, the story of Endwalker puts all its focus onto hope. It reminds you at every time appropriate that things can change, enemies can become fast allies, the end of the world can be overcome. The meaning of life isn't just to die, but instead to live. One scene that got me relatively early on that stuck with me is when a member of an opposing faction is brought under the care of your allies. He spent basically all his screen time hating the Eorzean alliance. It being made clear he feels this way as it's a part of his culture to refuse outside help and stand proud. His arrogance falls away when he's shown genuine kindness, when he's given hot soup to warm him up in the cold, when he's shown acceptance despite his fears and actions, that he just starts to break down and cry. It's such an honest, emotional moment. His arrogant worldview is shattered, and instead of seeing almost no future for his people who were willing to die in the cold due to stubbornly refusing assistance, he's got the opportunity to see a new future, a hopeful future. The story uses its extreme setting to tackle some complex emotions within the player. Nihilism is brought up a lot, to the point that the end boss is basically the personification of it. It posits the question, if you see no future, if the meaning of life is only to die, then what's the point? Would you run from your fate? Stand your ground? Or would you look to your flanks, to those beside you, back towards the path you've walked, and charge on forwards regardless? Endwalker rejects the nihilistic viewpoint. It instead insists that you hold on to hope, and know that the meaning of life isn't as simple as how it ends. Life is about the experience of living, of creating memories, and doing it all with others at your side. It never tries to downplay the suffering people can feel in life, however. It argues that the suffering one may feel makes the flash of hope and happiness even more worth it, and that's why we fight. If we lived our lives never knowing sorrow or suffering, then we wouldn't appreciate the life we have, nor the little time we're granted. The story resonated with me. While the metaphors can be a touch heavy-handed at times, I don't think that takes away from the power. When I played The Last of Us 2 when it came out, I didn't like it overly well at the time because of how hateful it is. I've come around on it all this time later, but in the moment, when the world was spinning into chaos as we entered into the first of many lockdowns, it was too much of a downer. It left me cold, added onto my feelings of hopelessness. However, when I said that Endwalker feels more appropriate earlier, this is what I mean. The story of the game is inspiring. It let me look at my perspective on life differently. Instead of seeing mediocrity, lost opportunities, and the lack of a future stuck in a dead-end job, it inspired me to look at what I have accomplished, at the lasting friendships I've forged, at what I still can do. And everything seems alright, if only for a moment. And moments like that are sure as hell worth holding on to. Thanks for watching.